So you can build a seventh chord on any degree of the diatonic major or minor scale. The dominant seventh is very frequently reused, but seventh chords built on other scale degrees do occur, although less often. Now remember, we talk about the structural name of a seventh chord, which as determined by the type of triad formed by the root third fifth, and the type of interval formed by the root in the seventh. So in the case of the 2-7 chord, it consists of a minor triad and a minor seventh. Therefore, we call it a minor seventh chord, or a minor minor seventh. In this example, a major triad, minor seventh, that means a dominant seventh chord. The structure is major minor. So major triad, minor seventh, also known as a dominant seventh chord. But if we build a seventh chord on the leading note, it is called a leading note seventh chord. There are two types: the diminished minor, which is a diminished triad and a minor seventh, or also known as a half diminished seventh chord. This is a symbol of it. Or the diminished seventh chord, which consists of a diminished triad and a diminished seventh. This occurs diatonically in minor keys, and the half diminished seventh chord occurs diatonically in major keys. So here's a pretty simple exercise. It just asks you to use key signatures, write diatonic leading note seventh chords in the following keys. So you just write down the key signature, write down the leading note, build a seventh chord on top of that leading note. Simple as that. Let's turn the page. If you'd like me to stop and work through a particular problem, and just don't be afraid to let me know. The diminished seventh chord. Now, unlike the diminished triad, you can use a diminished seventh chord in the root position. So we don't use a triad in the root position, the diminished triad, but you can use a diminished seventh chord in root position. You find this chord diatonically in minor keys, and that means that you don't have to alter any notes to find this chord in a minor key. It just occurs naturally within that key signature. Of course, it does have a raised leading note. They're always built on the raised leading note. It will occur as a complete chord containing the scale degrees sharp 7, 2, 4, and 6. Most of the time that it's used is to prolong tonic harmony. So the diminished seventh is closely related to the dominant seventh. The two chords share 3 common tones, 3 notes in common. So, in addition to prolonging the tonic, the diminished seventh chord may also have a dominant function. So remember, very closely related to the dominant seventh chord, so we can use it as a dominant type chord. Because a diminished seventh contains a number of dissonant intervals, this is important, it must be resolved carefully. The diminished seventh that occurs between a root and the seventh is extremely unstable. Should resolve inwards to a perfect fifth. Now we're going to get into this a little bit more, but so I'm just going to kind of briefly go through the basic resolutions that these notes should have. So the leading note rises, seventh of the chord falls. So this diminished seventh resolves inwards to a diminished fifth. To a perfect fifth. But the diminished seventh chord also contains 2 diminished fifths. So typically, these intervals resolve inwards. So you see one diminished fifth here from an example of the C minor example, the B up to C, F down to E flat. The diminished fifth resolves inwards to a third. The second diminished fifth, occurring between the D and the A flat, they also resolve inwards to the interval of a third. But depending on how the notes are arranged, right, this diminished fifth could occur as an augmented fourth or as an augmented second, depending on what the notes are arranged like. If they are augmented, they will resolve outwards to either a fourth or a sixth. But let's look at it in a more simple way. All right. Now, we are going to be looking at the resolution of this chord based on their scale degree number patterns. All right. So you've got to remember, you got to memorize these patterns. Here are 2 resolutions of diminished seventh chords in root position. In these examples, let's look for degree 6. In E minor, degree 6 is C, and it's here. So 6. That resolves to 5. So 6 to 5. 4 resolves to 3. Where's the 4th degree in E minor? E, F, G, A. It's right here. The 4th degree. That resolves to 3, 4 to 3. 2 to 3, the second degree resolves to 3. Where's the second degree in E minor? F. 2 resolves to 3, and 7 resolves to 1. 7, of course, being here. What you end up with is a tonic chord with 2/3. Right? So, and this is a situation in which it's okay to double the third of a root position tonic chord. So it's important to be able to identify the various notes, the various scale degrees, because they have to follow this pattern. All right. 6 to 5, 4 to 3, 2 to 3, and 7 to 1. So let's make a little chart. We're going to make a chart of the resolutions of the diminished seventh chord. So we'll call this chart. All right, so the first way we just learned is degree 6 to degree 5, 4 to 3, 2 to 3, and 7 to 1. So these are the scale degrees, right? That's the first way to do it. This, of course, is what's happening here is you're going from a diminished seventh chord to a tonic chord. All right. So I'm just going to write down the chord symbols. 7, 7 to 1. All right. And that's what's happening here. Now I will give you a little hint that when it comes to diminished seventh chords, if you follow this number pattern, you will always end up with a proper resolution of this diminished seventh chord. Right? Always. That's why this number pattern is so important. Take time to memorize this pattern, and also recognize when you encounter a diminished seventh chord. Because I will say this: it's one thing to be able to do all these exercises now while we're studying the chapter about diminished seventh chords, but it's one thing, a couple of months down the road where we've been away from this chapter for so long, you come to a harmonization question that involves a diminished seventh chord. Are you going to remember to follow these numbers? Well, somehow you have to remember. So let's try a couple of these examples here. All right, so the first example is in the key of A minor. So I'll write down A minor. Okay. I'm going to number all these notes. In A minor, G sharp is 7. F is 6, right? D is 4. B is 2. So all we have to do now is follow the numbers. 7 to 1. 1, of course, is A. 6 to 5. 5, of course, would be. Now, this is not now, don't get confused with the, with the interval above the bass. What we're doing is we're numbering the scale degrees. So these really should have little hats on them, but I leave them out just to, make it a little easier. All right. So these are the scale. Remember, this is a scale degree. The scale degrees. That's the pattern we're dealing with right now. 4 to 3. 2 to 3. Right? So these are all scale degrees. Scale degrees. Let's jot down here. Scale degree movement. Scale degree, and that's it. Simple as that. You follow this. You follow these directions, and you'll end up with a proper resolution of a diminished seventh chord every single time. Every time. That's how it is. So D minor, right? 7 to 1, 4 to 3, 2 to 3, 6 to 5. See? Easy. And that's how you do it. You can do the rest of these. Follow that. Always follow that scale degree pattern. That's super important. Super important. That's basically the whole gist of this chapter. There are other patterns. Let's take a look at one of them here on the next page. Now, for example, the augmented fourth between the soprano and the alto moves downwards. They move down to a perfect fourth, both voices moving in similar motion. This resolution is especially effective when the soprano falls from 2 to 1. Right, so 2 can go to 1. And this results in a chord with a doubled root. Here, 6 results to 5, 4 to 3, 2 to 1, and 7 to 1. But this can only be possible when 2 is placed above 6. Degree 2 is placed above 6, creating a fourth or a compound fourth. If the 2 is shown below 6, as shown in this next example, so 2 is below 6, it's going from a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth. This results in hidden fifths. So remember before we were talking about what results in hidden fifths? Well, when the seventh of a chord resolves downwards and another note resolves in the same direction to the interval of a perfect fifth, that would be an example of hidden fifths, and that's what's happening here. So you can't do it that way if 6 is above 2, because notice that we have a fifth. We have problems with fifths. But if 2 is above 6, well then that doesn't form a fifth, it forms a fourth. So moving in parallel fourth is always okay. So what you end up with is a chord that doesn't have a doubled third. You end up with a chord with a doubled root. Let's add this pattern to our list. So if degree 2 is above degree 6, then 2 can move to 1. 4 will still move to 3. 7 will always move to 1. And this is again for the same pattern, 7, 7, 7 diminished 7 to 1. So 2 has to be above 6. So remember that. I'll give you time to write this down. Back to our textbook. Now in particular the first number pattern, 6 to 5, 4 to 3, 2 to 3, and 7 to 1. Now that pattern will always work even if your diminished seventh chords are in a different inversion. So let's take a look at the first inversion diminished seventh chord. This is 7, 6, 5 because a third of the chord is in the bass. Let's go ahead and number all these notes. All right. In C minor, F is the fourth degree, so 4. A is a sixth degree, so I'll put 6 here. B is a seventh degree, and D is a second degree. So notice 2 moves to 3, 7 moves to 1, 6 moves to 5, and 4 moves to 3, just like we did it before. Now, because 2 is in the bass and 2 is moving to 3, well then, what we have is a diminished seventh chord in first inversion moving to a first inversion tonic chord. That's why very often 7, 6, 5 moves to 1, 6. Right. So this number pattern still is the same, right? 2 to 3, 7 to 1, 6 to 5, 4 to 3. Again, in 1, 6, the third is doubled. So let's add this to our list. It's the exact same thing that we've been looking at already, right? 6 to 5, 4 to 3, 7 to 1, but this time the second degree is in the bass, and that moves to the third degree. So this will result in 7, 6, 5 to 1, 6. Right? 7, 6, 5 to 1, 6. Notice though that the first example and this third example here, the numbers are always the same, right? The number pattern is the same. It's just a different note being in the bass. Right? So as long as you memorize this pattern here, you're going to be safe always. You'll be safe for every resolution of your diminished seventh chords. This is the only one really that's crucial for you to know. All right, let's go back to our textbook here. Turn the page. So again, these are 7-6-5 chords. They're moving to 1-6. Great. Don't be, intimidated. Simply, you write down the name. You write down the key. Once you have your proper key, number the notes. 7, 2, 6, 4, and then make sure the notes move to the proper notes afterwards, right? So I got 4 to 3, 4 to 3, 6 to 5, 7 to 1, and 2 to 3. 2 to 3. That's it, right? I follow the numbers. Follow the numbers. You'll come up with a proper resolution every single time. Every single time. I'll write them down. 4 to 3, 6 to 5, 7 to 1, 2 to 3. All right. I can't stress enough the importance of this number pattern. All right. It's very technical. It's very mechanical, but that's the way you're going to resolve these chords properly. All right, now that I just said that, you can resolve 7-6-5 to 1. That may happen, okay? Now, this progression is acceptable if the shift from diminished fifth to perfect fifth occurs between the bass and the tenor, or between the bass and the alto. You cannot do this if the fifths occur between the two outer voices. All right, so this is okay, because notice that the fifth here and this fifth here is occurring between the bass and the alto. Here you want to avoid it because the fifth is occurring between the two outer voices, so we can't do it that way. We cannot do it that way. All right. So this is the last one I'm going to add to this chart of ours. All right, this is the last one I'll add here. So we notice that 2 to 1, but the 6th degree cannot be in the soprano. The 6th degree cannot be in the soprano. So let's put 4 to 3 here. 4 to 3. All right. We'll put 6 to 5 here. We'll put 7 to 1 here. And we'll put 2 to 1 here. This chord is 7-6-5 to 1, root position 1. In this is okay as long as the 6 to 5 is not in the soprano. All right. So this chart is all I'm going to write, okay? Because this first one is really the most important one. Knowing these numbers, that number pattern, that's going to be the most important, okay? Because as I said, all these different variations in the chords and whatnot, that's all fine. It's good to know them, and we have to know them. But even if you forget them all and you only remember the first series of patterns, right? This first resolution, you can use that number pattern every single time, no matter what inversion of the diminished seventh chord, and come up with a proper resolution every single time. All right. Let's head back to our textbook here. Turn the page. What about 7-4-3? 7-4-3 will lead to 1-6, and I'm going to show you why very simply. This is scale degree 4, 2, 6, and 7. 7 to 1, 6 to 5, 2 to 3, 4 to 3. See? Just follow the numbers. Don't even worry about which inversion or which chord is going to follow. Right? This number pattern is helping us figure out where to move my notes. So step one, of course, is knowing that you have a diminished seventh chord, right? Obviously, if you're not sure what kind of chord you have, that's what you got to figure out first. So I write down G minor, and then I'll write down my chord symbol. F sharp, A, C, E flat. So this looks like a diminished 4-3, right? 7 diminished 4-3. Let's number them. Well, I got 4 here, 7, 6, and 2. 4 to 3, so the C will move to B. 7 to 1, F sharp will move to G. 6 to 5, E flat will move to D. And 2 to 3, 2 will move to B. That's it. That's all you have to do. Follow that number pattern. And you end up with a 1-6 chord. Again, if there's anything in here you'd like me to go through, in more detail, let me know for sure. Now, all these number patterns I explained to you for situations where you're resolving the diminished seventh chord. In other words, you're moving the diminished seventh chord to a 1 chord. But sometimes you can take a diminished seventh chord, such as this diminished 4-2, and not move it to 1 just yet. You're going to move it to a 5-6-4 diminished or a diminished seventh chord. If this is the case, okay, then you just move your notes to the nearest available chord tone. All right, you see that? The numbers do not apply when you're moving from 7-7 or 7-4-2 to either 5-6-4 or 5-7. Right? The numbers will move, the notes will move to the nearest available notes. All right? Make sure you avoid any faulty motion, faulty movement, like augmented intervals. If you might come across things like that as possible. All right, so let's turn the page. You got to know what notes are required in this 5-6-4 chord. I know that I need another A, right? I need an 8th, a 6th, and a 4th above. So the A can come from this G. This G is really close to the A, so I'll put the A here. I need a 6th above. The 6th above is the F. Which one's close to the F? The E is close to the F, so I'll put the F here. I need a 4th above, which is a D, so the C sharp is close to D. I'll put that here. Done. And then you resolve the 5-7 chord properly. All right, so just be aware of what chords you should be, what notes belong in the various chords. Here they're just asking you to resolve all these diminished seventh chords, and I'm going to give you a hint, the same hint again. Follow that number pattern, and you'll end up with a proper resolution every single time, every time. Right? So if I'm in the key of B minor, then this is 7, this is 6, this is 4, and this is 2. Move these notes in a way that I just showed you, and you'll get it right every time, every time. Right, so memorize that pattern. All right, now let's move on to the half diminished seventh chord. The half diminished seventh chord is found diatonically in major keys. This chord may be resolved to 1, 1-6, 5, 5-7, or 5-6, or to a cadential 6-4. Now, this is here's the easy way thing about this is that you may use the exact same number pattern. So in other words, in C major, 7 to 1, right? 4 to 3, 2 to 3, and 6 to 5. I can move to a 1 chord with a doubled root as long as degree 2 is above degree 6. So if 2 is above 6, 2 then can move to 1, just like in my chart. All right, 7 to 1, 4 to 3. And that's how it works. Because this is a half diminished chord, half diminished seventh chord. If you have a diminished seventh chord in first inversion, and you want to move to the 1 chord, that can never happen, because the fifth is not a a diminished fifth, the fifth would be a perfect fifth. You would always have perfect fifths. So the half diminished seventh chord always leads to 1. Always leads to 1. And in first inversion, so first inversion always leads to 1/6, because this is what I was actually talking about. You know, no matter where I place the A, right, that's a perfect fifth. So let's say 7/6/5, I want to move to 1, kind of like I did with the diminished seventh chord. I can never do that because it will always be parallel perfect fifths. So 7/6/5 always leads to 1/6. Always leads to 1/6. So follow the numbers. Follow the numbers, right? But if I move to another, if I morph this chord into another chord, like 7 diminished 7 becomes 5/6/5, move to the nearest chord tones, keep the common tones if necessary, if you've got them, then resolve this chord accordingly. All right. In question 8, name the keys, resolve them, just follow the numbers. So I'm just going to jot down in the margin to follow the numbers. All right. Follow the numbers. Super important. Always, when it comes to diminished seventh chords or half diminished seventh chords built on the leading note, always follow the numbers. All right, so it's nothing too overly complicated, really, if I remember my number patterns, right? Of course, I got to remember to write the chord, in a proper manner. I need a E, G, B, D, right? So I can put my D up here. Let's put a D up here. Maybe I'll put my G over here. I've got a E already, so I'll put a B over here. All right. Remember which notes are needed in the next chord, because I've got a 5/6/5 instead. C, E, G, B. So the E will stay the same. The G will stay the same. The B flat will stay the same. The only note that has to change is a D. It's got to move to C. So keep the notes really close together, right? And that is how you do it. Let's turn a page. Now, other than root position, the half diminished seventh chord occurs most often in second inversion. This chord usually resolves to 1/6. Why? Because 4 to 3, 7 to 1, I got these numbers again, 2 to 3, 6 to 5. So you see how the importance of this number pattern. 6, 5, 2, 3, 7, 1, 4, 3. Memorize it like you would a phone number. So again, here, simply follow the numbers. When a half diminished seventh chord resolves to 5/7, there are 3 common tones. Keep them in the same voices, of course. Right. Otherwise, if you move to a cadential 6/4, just move the notes to the nearest available chord tones. And that's all you would do. So the principles for the half diminished seventh chord are identical to that of the diminished seventh chord. Okay. Just move to the nearest available chord tone. Now, let's take a look at the way you would use a diminished seventh chord in tonic prolongation. There's nothing in here that's going to be really, really, novel or unique. We know this concept already. Right? You can use it. Now this is just the usages, right? You can use it as a neighbor chord. So 1 diminished 7 to 1. That's one way to use it. Now remember, the numbers will be in effect going from this chord to this chord. All right, diminished 7th to 1. It's always from the diminished 7th to the 1 chord. You can use it as sort of an incomplete neighbor chord going from 1/6 to 7/7 to 1. How important is it to memorize all of these usages? Not very, really. Not very important. Because the only place where you're going to have to come up with your own chord progression is in a Bach chorale question. And you're going to have plenty of options at your disposal. So it's not like an exam question would be something like, name all the usages of the diminished seventh chord. That's just not going to happen. But you could see it on a harmonization question, in which case that's where you'll need to know to follow the numbers going from diminished 7 to 1. You can use a diminished 7th chord, and it can be preceded by any predominant chord, right? Keep the common tones, you know, in the same voices. Move the other note by step, or you know, as close together as possible. The root of the chord, of course, will leap. So if you are leaping to the root of a 7/7 chord, you know, to a root position diminished 7th chord, leap downwards to it. Don't leap upwards to it, because the natural progression for this 7th degree is to go up. So down then up, down then up. Avoid those possible augmented seconds or augmented, you know, fourths that could occur. Got to avoid those. So here they ask you to name the keys for these progressions. Now, you know, remember, it's going from this chord to this chord where you have to follow the numbers. So I'm going to write that down. Numbers from here to there, right? Going from 1 to this chord. Now, that you just have to avoid faulty parallels. Make sure you've got all the correct notes, right? And so in all of these situations, you know, and just a little hint, you know, I mean, if you find that you're getting stuck a little bit, you know, remember that I'm doubling the third in this case here. You could double the third in the first instance of the 1 chord, and you know, if you want to make things easier for you that way. But it's not entirely necessary. It's more necessary going from this chord to this chord. So this chord would have the doubled third, right? You can use a first version of a diminished 7th chord as a passing chord between 1 and 1/6. Remember that very common progression of ours, 1/7/6/1/6? Well, now you can use 1/7/6/5/1/6. You know, very similar. The only difference is that we're adding the 7th. We're adding the 7th. Notice that you might say, oh, look, there's parallel fifths. Well, not exactly, because one of them is a diminished fifth. Going from a perfect fifth to a diminished fifth is always okay in the same voices. Nothing wrong with that. It could be a neighbor chord, 1/6 to 7/6/5 back to 1/6. That's possible as well. So various ways to use the 7/6 chord, 7/6/5 chord, or this diminished 7th chord. What about the second inversion diminished 7th chord? Well, you could use it between 1/6, 1/6/7/4/3 to 1/6. Again, read through this. Not necessary for you to memorize it, really. Once we get to the chapter on harmonization, the Bach chorale harmonizations, we'll talk about what our options would be then. But just, you know, it's just enough for you to kind of read through and just be familiar with the fact that this diminished 7th chord could be used in all these different manners. Right? Because if they were to show you a progression, I don't think you would have a problem with you know, with filling in the notes. What I have to continue to draw your attention to is going from the diminished 7 to the 1. This is where you would follow the numbers. Right? So the previous prolongations of tonic harmony using 7/7 are also effective with the half diminished 7th chord in major keys. But you got to be careful when approaching and leaving the half diminished 7th chord or its inversions. Okay, you could have parallel perfect fifths as possible, so you got to avoid that. You do that by either doubling the third of chord 1, like so, for example in this chord here, or by revoicing the half diminished 7th chord. Right? Revoicing it. And what they mean by that is just making sure that you adjust the notes to avoid that parallel fifth. C to G is a fourth, and it's moving to D to A. If those two notes were flipped around, G to C, well then you would have, C to G, you know, or rather G, let me start over. G at the bottom to C is a fourth. A at the bottom to D is a fourth as well. Parallel fourth, that's okay. But if they were revoiced and you had C at the bottom and G at the top, then you would have parallel fifths that you just simply could not avoid. So you either double the third of chord 1, which is always an option, or you flip. So you flip it so that instead of having a perfect fifth, you have a perfect fourth. But that principle is, the same principle that we've always known for, all our time studying harmony. So you're just completing the following progressions here. Okay, just remember, okay, the only hint I'm going to give you is from here to here, numbers. All right? Remember, like I said, months from now, if we were to see a progression such as what we might see over here, they ask you maybe to fill in the notes of a progression such as this. 2 months from now, are you going to remember that going from chord 7, 4, 3 to 1, 6, you have to follow that number pattern that we learned today? You must. So somehow you got to have sort of a warning bell going off in your mind that whenever I see a diminished seventh chord, I got to remember about my numbers. And if you remember that, things become very easy. Very common mistake is forgetting that. The work this week, I'm sure, is going to be fine, right? But like I said before, months from now, we got to remember that. All right. Now, even in keyboard style, you still have to follow the numbers. All right, numbers. So I've got to make sure that I recognize when I come across a leading note seventh chord. Here is one of them. All right. So however this chord is arranged, maybe I've got C sharp, but the other notes I need in keyboard style are E, G, B. So maybe I'll put my, let's zoom in a little bit, E at the top, B down here, and G over here. Still, number them. Let's number them. 7. It'd be helpful to write down the key first, D major. This would be degree 4, this would be degree 6, and this would be degree 2. So 4 to 3, 6 to 5. If you want to write down the numbers, the scale degrees beside the notes, that would be helpful as well. 2 to 3. Great. That's a proper resolution. I'll add my stem later. Now remember, because this degree 2 is above degree 6, if I really wanted to, I could take my degree 2 and move it to 1. If you don't remember that, don't worry about it. Just remember the first way to do it. Move 2 to 3. You'll get it right. And that is how you do it. So the rest is okay. It's really just recognizing the leading note seventh chord and then resolving the notes properly. That's what we have to work at. Now, it is possible to use 7 diminished 7 in major keys if the seventh chord is lowered. So a lot of composers use that diminished seventh chord in major keys to provide color and interest. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good. It makes things more interesting. But you need a accidental. The A flat is not part of the C major scale, so I got to add that in there, and I've got to indicate it in my chord symbols. All right, so notice that it's the same, the major key and the minor key. In fact, I'm borrowing this diminished seventh chord from my minor key. So if I choose to use it to have the diminished seventh chord, and I'm in a major key, I need an accidental. You'll see that sometimes in the chord symbols themselves, right? So that'll tell you whether or not you're using a diminished seventh chord or a half diminished seventh chord. In all these examples, I see a flat 7. So wherever my seventh is, for example, E, maybe I'll put the E over here, that's got to be flattened, right? So follow your symbols. Follow your symbols. But the resolution of this borrowed chord, it's going to be exactly the same. Follow your numbers. So you're looking at your figured base here. If you're unsure of what all these chords are, feel free to write in the, feel free to write them in. Now I know I've got a diminished seventh chord. Wherever my seventh is, my C, that has to be natural, right? So maybe I'll put it here. Natural. Okay, now remember, like I said before, don't get confused with the seventh of the chord and the seventh degree, right? When I number my notes, I'm numbering them with a degree, right? The scale degree, okay, and so on. Finally, let's talk about the diminished seventh chord as a dominant functioning chord. So I mentioned before that you can use this chord as a dominant functioning chord, and it could take the place of 5 or 5/7 in a harmonic progression. When you approach it from a predominant chord, try to keep the seventh as a common tone. Right? So the seventh is a common tone. The seventh of the chord, right? Not the leading note, but the seventh of the chord, common tone. Prepare it as a common tone, if you can. If you can. Right? So because these are all dominant functioning chords, now I can proceed with a predominant chord as we've seen before. Keep the common tones in the same voice. All the other notes move to the nearest available chord tone. Avoid faulty parallels as usual. And the diminished seventh chord can be used in dominant prolongation. I take my dominant chord, I morph it, or I change it into a diminished seventh chord. That's one way of extending my dominant area. So if it's my diminished seventh chord that's moving to the 1/6, again, this is where you're going to follow the numbers. So if you take anything from today's class, that is this number, all right? Again, like I said, think of it as like some kind of phone number: 65432371. 65432371. Remember that. All right, so we got some questions here, filling in the voices. Remember, again, I got a borrowed note, right? Altered note, rather. Lower that seventh. Follow the numbers. Follow the numbers. So recognize your diminished seventh chords, and then follow the numbers. All right? Really important. Really, really important. Here I've got a dominant seventh chord that's turning into a diminished seventh chord, so remember that. All right? From here to here, you got to recognize it, right? Take a look at that chord, write down the chord symbols if need be. Recognize when you have a diminished seventh chord. Even in keyboard style, follow the numbers. So it's hardest to spot in a situation like this, right? It may not occur to you that I've got a diminished seventh chord here or here. So my advice again would just be to fill in all the chord symbols. That would definitely help. The the analysis, of course, is very important. It's always important to do the analysis questions. Right? But again, recognize when you might have a diminished seventh chord. Always look at the root of the chord. If it's a leading note, if the root is a leading note and it's a seventh chord, then you've got either a diminished seventh or a half diminished seventh. Right? So it's really just adding that chord to our vocabulary. And that's really all there is to it. Before I take any possible questions, I'm going to let you know which pages I'd like to see. I would definitely like to see page 56. I would like to see page 53. Let's make it easy. 53, 54, 56. These are the pages I'd like you to send me. Any questions at all about today's material?